Hey, so there's another piece that I want to speak into in terms of the work I see Singularity can participate in the world, and it's to do with national trauma. So, just recently we've had this unspeakably awful event that happened in the United States where I think it was 19 children and 2 adults were gunned down in a school. No words to express the heartbreak and the tragedy of such an event. And at the same time, I was reading some stuff that was saying that was actually something like the 200th, or there have been 200 mass shootings in the United States since the beginning of this year, 2022. And I found myself in a kind of exploration of like, okay, well, how do I show up? How do I, what is the non-polarized warriorship that's a yes to the one humanity and the one earth that lies in this fierce debate over gun wars? And I felt myself like wanting at a certain point to start to really look, okay, well, is there some trauma playing out in this? Is there some national trauma playing out in this? National trauma is real. National trauma is something that becomes woven into the cultural fabric of a society as a result of its life, as a result of its developmental journey. In the lead up to the Russia-Ukraine war, whilst the diplomatic attempts to find peace and to stop it breaking out into war were happening just before it broke out into war, the French leader Emmanuel Macron, I read him say that he just really urged a perspective on what was building in terms of Russia's response that was sensitive to the collective trauma of the Russian people and the Russian nation. And I remember when I read that, it hit me deep and it hit me hard, because it was like, wow, I don't think I've ever seen or heard a national leader consciously recognizing the existence of national trauma as something that's playing out in some growing conflict. What happens so much of the time is that actually there's just more and more polarization. One nation does something that other nations condemn, and there's just more and more condemnation. There's more and more of a Mexican standoff. There's more and more conflict, and sometimes it breaks out into war. But any of us who've, done a bit of our emotional work when it comes to being in deep and intimate relationship one-to-one with another human being, we know that sometimes the triggers and the traumas and the terrors and the pains of our past play out in the way that we react to those around us. And that isn't actually really about the situation in question. It's about something I'm really afraid of, some deep pain and some deep terror that remains unresolved in me, that then plays out in that scenario with that person because I'm scared that whatever it is going to happen again. So, national trauma is something that that every nation has some version of. I'm English. I come from Great Britain, and the English certainly have some national trauma. And I would say that we have some national trauma that expresses in different areas, but one area is certainly around the emotional and erotic levels of the human being. I think, there's some national trauma for English people that involves a collective repression of our emotions and a collective repression of our erotic or our sexual energy in certain ways, where there's then explosions, where there's then actually an overexpression that happens in certain contexts. And you can see that with, both, the Victorian times, which were both culturally deeply repressed and at the same time massively sexually active. And you can see it in the culture of binge drinking and, a lot of people having sexual encounters that, that are not coming from the most kind of self-connected conscious place within them. Because and that there's a culture in the UK, there's a culture in England particularly of like, okay, it's the weekend, I am now going to let fly all of the energies within my being that I've been repressing, because I have to get it out. So that's a way that I perceive just one angle on national trauma in England. And then I've been really contemplating, well, is there an angle of national trauma that's playing out in the States, in America, and in the United States around this whole gun issue, that's informing the charge around this topic, and I felt myself just really tuning in, like, what's the history here? What's the history around gun ownership in the United States? And, something that I spent time with is like, well, actually, the United States, one of the things that makes it an extraordinary nation is that it is this cultural melting pot that has emerged from people of so many nations, many in the beginning of its formation from Europe, going there to be part of a new cultural and national experiment. And, part of the American, as I perceive it, need to defend the right for gun ownership is to do with resistance to tyranny. Like, it's to do with making sure, like an attempt to make sure that there's no government or no monarchical power, or no empire that can suddenly have tyrannical rule over the people. And I would guess that there's some collective trauma in that involves people having come from nations where actually power was working in deeply unhealthy ways, and there was tyranny, and there was monarchies that were tyrannically ruling over people, and this can be seen in the American drive for freedom. That actually the freedom that is so deeply prized there is in certain ways a response to, and I'm not American, so this is a perception that I have, and I'm interested to be in dialogue with Americans and non-Americans about other perspectives. I'm not claiming this is truth, but what I observe is that perhaps that strong, kind of stand for freedom is in certain ways a reaction to tyranny that lives then, and the trauma of tyranny that lives in the bodies and in the national history of the United States. So on one hand, the people who went there were leaving in often tyrannical institutions of power. There was then also a civil war where, the colonial rule of the British was able to be put off, in many ways as a result of people being able to defend themselves and fight. So there's that's there. And simultaneously, the people who went to the States, especially those who were part of the, pushing forward onto the frontier, going more and more west, they were living they were doing that in profoundly hostile environments where the Native American Indians were fighting back, understandably, so I think a critical piece of Singularity's work is going to contribute to the emergence of a conversation about national trauma that needs to happen, that is about us becoming aware of why some of the conflicts are showing up with such incredibly powerful lines of schism and charge, both within nations and between them. And I think what's going to be critical there is that we do this in a way which understands that there are profoundly powerful energies locked up in our traumas, individually and collectively. And we want to harness those. There is life force, there is power underneath my deepest fears or those of a nation. There is, there is incredible energy that can sharpen my clarity and open my heart and remind me, if I'm willing to feel it, of the reality of the one humanity and what connects us, the one life that is the same in me, that's the same in you. that can break through and wash through the lines of division that are maintained so long as we don't go there, but we are fighting in our perspectives that often are informed by our traumas. So I imagine that we're going to focus on this in one of our campaigns coming up, so stay tuned. Yeah, interested in any other perspectives that people have around this conversation around national trauma, or any other angles on that.